What if the greatest scandal on screen was never spoken? 10 electric performances from 1930s, 1950s Hollywood hid queerness in glances, gestures, and coded scenes. Disguises turning into identities, devotion flipping into obsession. From Daphne to Danvers, Bruno to Pretorius, we'll unmask the exact frames, pair vintage clips with sharp commentary, and decode what censors forced off camera. Stay till the final reveal. Like, comment your pick, subscribe. First on our list is Jerry, or rather Daphne, from Some Like It Hot, 1959, played by Jack Lemmon. On the surface, it's just a screwball comedy setup. Broke musicians hide from the mob by dressing as women and sneaking into an all-girls band. But the moment Jerry slips into a dress, something changes. The gag stops looking like a joke and starts feeling like a transformation. Jerry only put on the dress to survive. That was the plan. Escape the mob, play with the girls, collect a paycheck. But once the wig sat on his head and the heels clicked across the floor, something shifted. He didn't just pass as Daphne, he seemed to settle into her. Watch closely, the way he fusses with his skirt, the bounce in his step, the sparkle in his eyes. What began as disguise starts to feel like revelation. Even those stolen glances in the mirror, the smile, the tilt of the head, look less like mockery and more like recognition. Then comes Osgood, the aging millionaire who showers Daphne with flowers, dinners, and a yacht. On paper, it's a running gag, but the camera lingers on Jerry's reactions, and Lemmon lets something slip between the laughs. When Osgood takes Daphne's hand, Jerry doesn't pull away. He laughs, yes, but it's nervous, delighted laughter, like part of him wants to see how far this can go. Every dance, every gift, plays less like parody and more like a romance Hollywood couldn't name. And when Daphne joins the band on stage, Jerry doesn't feel like an intruder anymore. He belongs. The maraca scene is where the mask nearly breaks. Jerry bursts into the hotel room, shaking those maracas, shouting to Joe, "I'm engaged." The crowd roars, but look at Jerry's eyes. He isn't horrified, he's exhilarated. The line between comedy and confession vanishes. It's Daphne speaking now, and she doesn't want to stop. This isn't drag for survival anymore. This is drag as desire. And then the ending. Osgood declares, "I'm going to marry you." Jerry rattles off excuses, the smoking, the infertility, the reveal. "I'm a man." Osgood only shrugs, nobody's perfect. Famous as a punchline, it's really something more radical. The closest the production code ever came to letting a man say, "I don't care, I want you anyway." And Jerry? He doesn't recoil. He sighs, not relief, but surrender. That final breath is the tell. Jerry has lived as Daphne, been courted as Daphne, and, for one fleeting moment, accepted as Daphne. The mob may have been chasing Jerry, but what really caught him was something far more dangerous. The possibility that Daphne wasn't a mask at all, but the truest part of himself, laughing through lipstick, shaking maracas, dreaming of a love the world refused to see. Next on our list is one of Hitchcock's most chilling creations, Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca, 1940, played with icy precision by Judith Anderson. She doesn't storm into Manderley with noise or violence. She glides, a shadow in black, moving like a ghost tethered to the dead Rebecca, the woman she served, and perhaps something more. From the moment she appears, Danvers is less a housekeeper and more a haunting. Watch the way she speaks of Rebecca. Her voice drops to a whisper, almost trembling with reverence. She doesn't simply remember her mistress, she worships her. In one of the film's most unforgettable scenes, she leads the new Mrs. De Winter into Rebecca's bedroom. The camera lingers as Danvers strokes a silk nightgown, her fingers caressing the fabric with an intimacy that feels uncomfortably close to desire. Her words are hushed, awestruck, as though she is describing a lover rather than an employer. It's devotion, but a devotion twisted by grief, jealousy, and a love she can never name. Her disdain for the young bride isn't ordinary cruelty. It burns with something more personal. Danvers hovers over her, too close, too insistent, her eyes glittering with contempt and longing. When she urges the new Mrs. De Winter to leap from the window to end her life, it doesn't play like a simple act of malice. It feels like possession. It feels like she cannot bear to see Rebecca's memory defiled by another woman, and so she tries to erase her entirely. It's villainy, yes, but it's also heartbreak, obsession, and forbidden intimacy collapsing into madness. Anderson's performance never shouts its secret. It doesn't need to. Every gesture, every silent glide across the floor, every cold stare carries the weight of something unspeakable in 1940. A woman in love with another woman, trapped in the role of servant, reduced to silence and longing. Hitchcock, ever the master of subtext, encouraged Anderson to play her like a specter, restrained, tightly wound, almost supernatural in her devotion. That restraint is what makes her terrifying. And when she stands in front of the great windows, her black dress flowing like morning made flesh, it's as if Rebecca herself has returned through her. Danvers didn't twirl a mustache or cackle with glee. She weaponized silence. She turned grief into menace. And in the golden age of Hollywood, where queerness had to live between the lines, Danvers became an icon of everything forbidden. She didn't just guard Rebecca's memory, she merged with it, binding her very identity to a love that could never be spoken, but could still burn the house down. He sets down the champagne glasses with a smile too smooth, while his partner's hands still tremble from what they've just done. The body of their classmate lies stuffed in a chest, hidden in plain sight at a dinner party. The camera never leaves the room, and neither does the tension. Two men circling one another with glances that say more than the script ever could. Glances full of pride, panic, and something that feels like desire. These men are Brandon and Philip, the killers at the heart of Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, 1948, played by John Dahl and Farley Granger. The film is based on the infamous Leopold and Loeb case, two young men whose intellectual arrogance and rumored romantic bond drove them to murder. Hitchcock couldn't say that outright. The production code made sure of that, but the chemistry between Brandon and Philip pulses through every frame. Brandon, confident and almost gleeful, treats the crime like a game. Philip, nervous and fragile, drinks too much, stammers too easily. They are opposites, yet bound together, like lovers who know each other's weaknesses too well. When Brandon reassures him with a hand on the shoulder, it doesn't feel like friendship. It feels intimate. When Philip panics under questioning, Brandon looks at him not just with frustration, but with the authority of someone who owns his partner's fear and his heart. The suspense comes not only from whether the guests will discover the corpse, but whether someone will discover them. Their secret isn't just murder. It's the unspoken closeness in the way they hover near each other, the coded tenderness buried inside the cruelty. Granger himself would later come out as bisexual, lending even more weight to the way Philip seems torn between guilt and devotion. There are moments when Brandon leans too close, his voice dropping into a register meant only for Philip. Moments when Philip's gaze lingers too long, trembling between terror and longing. To 1948 audiences, it might have looked like nervous tension. To modern eyes, it looks like something else. The kind of intimacy that dares not speak its name. Hitchcock turns repression into spectacle. The long, unbroken takes trap the audience in that apartment just as much as the killers are trapped in their silence. Every whispered aside, every shared look carries a charge that audiences couldn't name, but they felt it. This wasn't just about a crime of arrogance. It was about a relationship that couldn't exist in daylight, a queerness forced to hide behind Nietzschean philosophy and a locked chest. Rope never declares Brandon and Philip as lovers. It couldn't. But the way they circle each other, the way the crime binds them, makes the subtext undeniable. It's less a murder mystery than a portrait of forbidden intimacy, one that makes the viewer complicit, watching two men dance on the edge of exposure, desperate to keep both their secrets buried. From the first frames, Queen Christina, 1933, announces itself as something different, a royal drama laced with forbidden longings. And at the center of it all is Greta Garbo, whose performance as Sweden's most enigmatic monarch blurs the line between history and hidden desire. Christina doesn't move like the other women in court. She strides in breeches, reclines with the authority of a king, and speaks with a sharp wit that unsettles her advisors. But her true secret is not political, it's personal. In one brief, electrifying moment, she kisses her lady-in-waiting. It's soft, unhurried, almost casual. And yet, in 1933, it was a scandalous flash of intimacy Hollywood wasn't supposed to show. The kiss passes quickly, but the implication lingers, a whispered confession caught on celluloid. Garbo herself was a mystery the public never solved, and she pours that ambiguity into Christina. The queen refuses to marry, rejects the suitors paraded before her, and laughs at the idea of surrendering her freedom. She resists the throne's demands with the same ease she resists convention, creating a monarch who is both untouchable and achingly human. The camera captures her not as a woman trapped in gowns and courtly rituals, but as someone who bends gender at will. Even her pauses, the way she smokes, the way she studies another woman's face a beat too long, feel like signals smuggled past censors. Later, disguised as a man, Christina moves through taverns and inns with a confidence that feels almost too natural. She binds her chest, wears a cloak, drinks with men, and slips effortlessly into masculine space. The disguise doesn't feel like theater. It feels like liberation. Watching her in those scenes is to watch a monarch who has found, however briefly, a way to live outside the categories the world insists upon. But Hollywood couldn't leave her there. The story bends back toward convention, forcing Christina into a tragic love with a man. By the end, she is alone, her gaze fixed toward the horizon, her expression unreadable. Is she mourning her lost lover, or mourning the freedom she almost tasted? Garbo leaves the answer deliberately opaque, and that mystery has fueled generations of queer readings. Queen Christina remains one of the boldest queer-coded films of Hollywood's golden age, not because it shouted its secret, but because it dared to whisper it. The kiss with her maid, the masculine disguise worn too comfortably, the refusal to conform. All these moments add up to a portrait of queerness hidden inside a royal legend. Christina's rebellion was never just about power or politics. It was about the right to love outside the lines, even if history and Hollywood refused to let her. A portrait that never ages, a face too perfect to be real, staring back with an almost sensual stillness, while the canvas behind it rots with corruption. That is the central image of the picture of Dorian Gray, 1945, MGM's adaptation of Oscar Wilde's scandalous novel. And within it, one of Hollywood's most haunting queer-coded figures took shape. Played by Hurd Hatfield, Dorian isn't just beautiful, he's unnervingly flawless. His aloof charm, his chilling stillness, his refusal to betray emotion all feel less like innocence and more like a mask. The camera lingers on him longer than it does on anyone else. Close-ups of his face become moments of worship, as though the audience is invited to desire him, but never allowed to touch. In a time when men were rarely filmed as objects of beauty, Dorian becomes the exception. A man adored by the camera and distrusted for it. Then there's Lord Henry, played by George Sanders, who whispers philosophies drenched in decadence. Their exchanges carry a charge that audiences in 1945 might not have named, but it's impossible to miss now. Lord Henry doesn't simply tempt Dorian into vice, he seduces him with words, their conversations loaded with forbidden intimacy. It's as if the film itself is staging a love affair between beauty and corruption, male body and male gaze. The production code forbade any direct mention of homosexuality, but suggestion was another matter. Dorian's immorality, his late nights, his secret pleasures, his refusal to marry, reads like a coded warning. His soul rots in the portrait while his face remains untouched. A metaphor queer critics later reclaimed. The decay of a life lived in repression, the price of desire forced underground. Rumors in Hollywood swirled that Hatfield himself lived a life of discretion, adding another layer of intrigue to his performance. Whether or not that was true, his Dorian felt like more than a role. He radiated queerness in the way he smiled too faintly, touched too delicately, and let Lord Henry's words linger a little too long. His beauty was his power, but also his curse. By the film's end, when the portrait is finally revealed in its grotesque horror, the symbolism is inescapable. What the world saw was a man too perfect to question. What he hid was the truth of his longing, rotting in private. That duality, polished exterior, corrupted secret, became the blueprint for queer-coded villains and anti-heroes for decades to come. The picture of Dorian Gray isn't remembered just as a Gothic morality tale. It stands as one of the clearest reflections of queerness in Hollywood's golden age, not despite its coded nature, but because of it. The portrait may crumble, but Dorian's image, flawless, distant, and untouchably queer, remains frozen forever. Two pairs of shoes brush against each other on a train, one polished, flamboyant, almost too stylish, the other sturdy and practical. Hitchcock lingers just long enough to make it feel like more than coincidence. That first spark of contact introduces Bruno Anthony, played by Robert Walker, a man whose charm is magnetic, whose intentions are dangerous, and whose queerness simmers beneath every gesture. On the surface, Strangers on a Train is a murder thriller. Bruno proposes a perfect crime to tennis star Guy Haines. You kill for me, I'll kill for you. But the real tension isn't the pact. It's Bruno himself. The way he hovers too close, breathes too softly into Guy's space, his fixation bordering on erotic. He doesn't just want Guy's cooperation. He wants Guy. Look at the way he fingers Guy's lighter, caressing it like a keepsake. The way his voice dips when he talks about their arrangement, as if describing a secret romance rather than a conspiracy. Hitchcock never lets the subtext slip into dialogue, but Walker's performance does all the work. The sly smile, the glittering eyes, the touch that lingers too long. It's queerness coded as menace, desire repackaged as obsession. In post-war America, queerness was still branded deviant, and Bruno embodies every stereotype of the misfit. Flamboyant clothing, delicate mannerisms, disinterest in women. Notice how he treats the women in the film with bored disdain, while every ounce of his energy is focused on Guy. Even when he commits murder, it feels less about the victim than about binding Guy to him forever. His violence is intimacy twisted into possession. But he also has what makes villains unforgettable: charisma. Audiences can't look away from him. He's dangerous, yes, but also magnetic, pulling Guy and us into his orbit whether we want to be there or not. Hitchcock stages him like a dark mirror to Guy, the devoted shadow, the forbidden admirer who loves too much and too wrongly. Patricia Highsmith's original novel was far more explicit about the homoerotic undertones, but Hollywood couldn't be. So Hitchcock leaned into nuance. He even encouraged Walker to emphasize Bruno's queerness, not to make him a joke, but to make him unsettling. Desire itself becomes the threat, an intimacy that can't be spoken out loud, redirected into violence and control. Tragically, Bruno wasn't just one of Walker's greatest roles, it was also one of his last. The actor died suddenly that same year, giving the performance an eerie, haunting weight. Today, critics still debate him. Was Bruno a casualty of repression or a quiet rebellion, a coded gay character hiding in plain sight? What remains undeniable is this: Bruno Anthony isn't just a villain. He is seduction and menace wrapped together. A queer-coded figure who turns a handshake into a caress, a conspiracy into a courtship. In Hitchcock's hands, the real crime was never just murder. It was desire, dangerous, forbidden, and unforgettable. Joel Cairo floats effortlessly into the Maltese Falcon, 1941, his soft-spoken, immaculately dressed, and exuding an air of elegance that stands in stark contrast to the film's rough, tough world. Played by Peter Lorre, he becomes one of Hollywood's first queer-coded villains, and one of its most enduring. Cairo is no brute. He enters the story with an almost theatrical polish, soft-spoken, meticulous in his dress, his hands fluttering nervously as if every word carries hidden weight. Against the backdrop of Humphrey Bogart's Sam Spade, all grit and growl, Cairo looks like another species entirely. The contrast is deliberate. Where Spade embodies the straight, rugged masculinity of film noir, Cairo embodies the other, refined, ambiguous, and unsettling. In Dashiell Hammett's original novel, Cairo's homosexuality was stated outright. But in 1941, under the strict rules of the production code, it had to be buried in subtext. So the film leans on signals: his perfumed handkerchief, his fastidious manner, the way he recoils from physical violence, yet lashes out with words and schemes. Peter Lorre, himself an outsider in Hollywood as a Jewish immigrant who fled Nazi Germany, infuses Cairo with a sensitivity that feels deliberate. His difference isn't a flaw to be hidden. It's a weapon the film uses to mark him as dangerous. Watch closely when Cairo and Spade confront each other. The way Cairo adjusts his tie before speaking, the almost tender way he touches the objects around him, the hesitations in his voice, they all play like coded signals, mannerisms that mainstream audiences of the time might read as weakness, but queer viewers could recognize as something more familiar and far more complicated. The threat Cairo poses isn't physical, it's psychological, intimate, even seductive in its own way. Film historian Vito Russo, in The Celluloid Closet, pointed to Cairo as a template, the villain whose queerness becomes shorthand for deviance. He doesn't fit into the world of hard men and femme fatales, so the film twists his queerness into menace. His difference makes him suspicious, even before he speaks. And yet, that very difference is what keeps him fascinating decades later. Lorre himself seemed to lean into the role. Some stories suggest he exaggerated Cairo's quirks as a subtle act of defiance, a way of mocking Hollywood's rigid rules while playing along with them. Whether that's true or not, Cairo became iconic, a queer-coded figure hiding in plain sight, draped in perfume and silk, yet sharp enough to carve his way into noir legend. In a genre defined by smoke, shadows, and men with guns, Joel Cairo stood apart. Too refined, too ambiguous, too strange to be dismissed. He wasn't just a villain. He was a signal that queerness was already on screen, whispered through mannerisms, scented in perfume, concealed in plain sight. In the marble bathtub, surrounded by antiques and the swell of classical music, Waldo Lydecker makes his entrance in Laura, 1944. He doesn't walk on screen. He dictates, narrating his own story as though the world itself belongs to him. Played with razor-sharp precision by Clifton Webb, he isn't just a villain. He's queerness personified in silk and venom, a man too elegant, too bitter, too dangerous to ignore. From the start, Waldo's obsession with Laura Hunt doesn't feel romantic. It feels possessive, almost curatorial. He treats her not as a woman, but as an artifact, another prized object in the carefully curated museum of his life. He arranges her career, her friendships, even her lovers, until she becomes less a person than a reflection of his taste. And when anyone threatens that order, especially the rugged masculine detective Mark McPherson, Dana Andrews, Waldo's contempt boils over. Watch their exchanges, the acid wit, the daggered glances. It's more than rivalry. It smolders with a personal tension that critics and historians have long read as queer subtext. Because the production code forbade direct depictions of homosexuality, queerness seeped through in suggestion. And Waldo fit the archetype that film historian Vito Russo later described in The Celluloid Closet. The queer-coded villain who wounds with words instead of fists, whose intelligence and elegance become his menace. He is urbane, witty, emotionally volatile, and isolated. A man whose obsession masks a deeper hunger the era refused to name. The most chilling moments aren't when Waldo lashes out, but when he restrains himself. His voice dripping with irony, his disdain sharpened into wit, his very stillness a threat. Webb's performance layers menace with heartbreak. The fury of a man displaced not just by another suitor, but by a society that denied the possibility of his desire. Laura's betrayal isn't simply that she loves someone else. It's that she reminds Waldo of what he can never have, what he cannot even say. Off-screen, Clifton Webb himself added to the mystique. Never married, known for his meticulous elegance and theatrical manner, he lived with his mother well into adulthood, details seized on by gossip columnists of the time and later folded back into readings of Lydecker. Whether coincidence or embodiment, Webb didn't merely act the part, he inhabited it. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination and carved out a new space in film noir, the sophisticated, emotionally intense antagonist who stood apart from the genre's hard-boiled masculinity. In a world of smoky bars and femme fatales, Waldo Lydecker was different, too well-dressed, too articulate, too invested in control. He didn't twirl a mustache, he didn't confess his desire, but that silence was his danger. He became the man scorned, not just by Laura, but by a world unwilling to see who he really was. His menace came from elegance turned bitter, queerness redirected into obsession, repression weaponized into control. Waldo Lydecker wasn't merely a villain. He was a coded scream beneath Hollywood's polished whisper, a presence both silk and acid, laying the groundwork for generations of stylish, dangerous, and deeply queer antagonists to come. His voice cuts first, smooth, refined, but sharp enough to draw blood. Addison DeWitt, the venomous theater critic of All About Eve, 1950, enters not with a gun or a glare, but with words like a silk razor. Played by George Sanders, he is urbane, ruthless, untouchable, a man who doesn't chase the spotlight so much as consume it. When he speaks, everyone else shrinks. When he smiles, it's never warmth, it's a blade sheathed in charm. Unlike other men in the film, Addison shows no interest in women. His cool detachment, his cultivated style, his perfectly measured wit, all of it points somewhere else, toward a queerness the production code refused to name. Watch how he circles Eve Harrington. He doesn't woo her, he corners her. Their famous confrontation isn't seduction, it's domination. He strips her illusions bare, leaning in so close it almost feels intimate. But it isn't intimacy, it's control. He doesn't want Eve as a lover. He wants her as property, a creation owned, molded, and caged. It's in that chilling line, "You belong to me," that the subtext crystallizes. There's no love in his claim, no conventional desire. Instead, it's a possession that feels queer in its refusal of heterosexual norms, and dangerous in its refusal to name what it really is. In that moment, Addison isn't just a critic, he's a puppeteer, pulling strings with the cruel pleasure of someone who finally reveals their power. Historians have long placed DeWitt alongside other queer-coded villains like Cairo or Waldo Lydecker. But Addison is something colder. Smooth, calculating, venom dressed in silk. He embodies Hollywood's tendency to equate queerness not with flamboyance, but with menace disguised as sophistication. As Vito Russo noted in The Celluloid Closet, Addison represents queerness sharpened into a weapon, intelligence used as domination. Off-screen, whispers only fueled the reading. Some claim DeWitt was inspired by real Broadway critics, rumored for both their biting wit and hidden lives. Sanders leaned into the role with relish, his rich baritone turning dialogue into incantations. He doesn't need to raise his voice, he doesn't even need to move much. His stillness is its own performance, daring the audience to hang on his every pause. And that's what makes Addison unforgettable. He isn't simply the man who critiques theater, he critiques masculinity itself, exposing the fragility beneath bravado. He doesn't just review plays, he writes destinies. And in doing so, he carved a place for one of Hollywood's most unmistakable queer-coded figures. Elegant, merciless, dangerous, not for what he said, but for what he implied. Addison DeWitt didn't twirl a mustache or leer with lust. He whispered, he cut, and he conquered. In the end, he didn't just control Eve Harrington. He controlled the film itself, gliding through it like a shadow with perfect diction and venom behind every word. Like all great queer-coded villains of Hollywood's golden age, he reminds us that repression could be just as terrifying and just as seductive as desire itself. And finally, we end where horror and queerness meet face to face, with Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Played with wicked theatricality by Ernest Thesiger, Pretorius isn't just a mad scientist, he is camp incarnate. Arch brows, sly gestures, a glass of wine always at hand, and a voice dripping with irony. In a film directed by James Whale, himself a gay man, Pretorius stands as one of the boldest queer-coded creations of Hollywood's golden age. From the moment he sweeps onto the screen, he's different from the gruff, conflicted Frankenstein. Pretorius is flamboyant, gleeful in his blasphemy, dismissive of women, and deeply, almost seductively invested in his partnership with Frankenstein. Their bond doesn't read like simple scientific collaboration. It reads like intimacy, an alliance charged with the kind of obsession the production code could never allow to be spoken. Watch the way he leans close, the way he flatters, the way he insists they will create life together. It feels less like science, more like a twisted courtship. Critics and historians have long pointed out the homoerotic subtext, two men locked in a secret project, creating life without women, building something both monstrous and beautiful in their own image. Pretorius, with his sly wit and sinister camp, becomes not just Frankenstein's partner in crime, but his tempter, his corrupter, his forbidden companion. Whale knew exactly what he was doing. Many believe he encouraged Thesiger to play Pretorius with exaggerated flamboyance, not only to smuggle queerness past the censors, but to mock the paranoia surrounding queer influence itself. In a world terrified of men who lived outside the norm, Pretorius turned that fear into spectacle. He laughs, he preens, he seduces, and he terrifies because he refuses to be invisible. As the laboratory goes up in flames, Pretorius dies with a grin, theatrical to the last. But his shadow lingers. He is both parody and menace, satire and sincerity. A character whose queerness is inseparable from his charisma, whose camp survives the fire that consumes him. He dies, yes, but his laugh echoes, as though mocking the very idea that fire or rubble could erase him. And so, the list ends where repression and revelation collide. Dr. Pretorius wasn't just a villain, he was a provocation, a reminder that queerness could haunt even the darkest corners of horror, surviving in irony, in flamboyance, in the laughter that refuses to be silenced. The curtain falls, but his smirk remains, a final defiant echo of queer villainy in Hollywood's golden age, daring the audience to remember him long after the screen goes dark. The old shadows still speak. If you like this deep dive, hit like. Tell me in the comments which character you want unpacked next, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Next episode, I'll bring frame-by-frame scenes, rare archival clips, and the historical evidence that proves the subtext. Thanks for watching. See you in the shadows.